Okay, hey everybody, it's Thursday night. Sorry we're a couple minutes late here jumping on. Had a few technical difficulties to iron out, but welcome. Thursday night, 7:30 p.m., and we are here. And the guys, I haven't mentioned this to the guys yet. I'll just do a quick introduction. As you guys know, I'm Greg LeBuff, and I have Coach Dustin Doder and Coach Brad Vandalite with me tonight, as always, every Thursday night. And the thing that they don't know is that we are officially changing the name of this show, which has been up to this point the Protect Our Strategy session. But we are converting everything, and we are changing over to become a podcast that'll be available on every hosting platform. And so from this point forward, officially, we are going to be running under the title of The Education of a Weaponized Man, Mastering the Tool of Violence. That'll be what the new podcast will be called. And it'll still be the same format in the sense of each episode, each Thursday, we will go deep into the weaponizing process. That means that I have to change over also our intro, which I'm about to cut to. Same intro, I'll just change it from Protect Our Strategy session to the Education of a Weaponized Man. So if you were listening to this, depends at what point you hear this, you may hear previous episodes where we are going by the Protect Our Strategy session, and you will from this point forward now hear us as the Education of a Weaponized Man. So listen, tonight, I said that over the next 16 episodes, last week we covered on violence is a language, and this week we're going to be diving into the hard realities. So each of these 16 episodes are going to build off a foundation that of the previous episode. Although you could listen to them in any order, that's fine. But if you want the most out of this, start off with the episode on violence as a language and follow along over the next 16. All right, having said that, gentlemen, let's cut to our intro. We'll be back in 60 seconds. This is going to be a great one. Do not miss this. We're going to cover the hard realities.
Many people understand that they can at any time become the target of a violent criminal assault. These same people know that they have a life, family, and property worth defending. Criminals understand that violence is its own language. Violence is not the sport of competition. Violence is not the art of fighting. Violence is about one thing: destruction. There are those who believe that violence, even in self-defense, is morally wrong. Then there are good people like you who know that defending yourself, family, and others, as well as your property, is not only a personal right, but a duty within a civilized society. Understand, violent assaults are won before they occur. People who learn strategy survive. People who do not will not. For those brave people who believe life is precious and worth defending, welcome to the Protect Our Strategy session.
Okay, we are back. Okay, guys, we got a lot to cover tonight. We're going to dive into what we call the hard realities of the weaponization process. This is some fundamental knowledge that people need to understand, and it's a big one. So, hard realities. I'm going to set up a framework for everybody. There is four different subheadings that fall under this category when we talk about this, when we lecture about this. And so today we're going to start off with the number one thing under the hard realities. And I'm going to make a statement, and I've said this a lot, but I really want to dive into this and help people understand what this means. But the statement basically is this: man does to man things that animals would never consider. And I'm going to put one little caveat in on that. It's not only man does to man, right? It is man does, unfortunately, to boys and girls. Right? So what's the gist of this? Man does to man, or boys and girls, things that animals would never consider. This is a hard reality. Okay? This is what a lot of people shy away from. Matter of fact, last week when we talked about violence being a language, one of the things we talked about is that people, they deny, they don't want to learn to speak the language of violence. There's blind spots in society, and violence is one of those blind spots. So this is really going to nail a lot of people. A lot of people, this conversation is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. So, visceral thoughts. Man does to man things that animals would never consider.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, some people have some pretty twisted minds. You know, they can do very horrific things that most of us can't stomach and don't want to talk about, for sure.
Yep. Okay, well, let's go on this for a second because, and Brad, actually, no, Brad, go ahead. I want to get your visceral reaction off this.
you just, we're talking about hard realities, and just the quote that you said, "Man does to man," um, is fact. Like when I hear that, and we have this conversation, it's not like, oh, like, does that happen? Like, is that possible? Like, no, it's fucking fact that
Yeah.
that happens. And my visceral response is that, like, that's that is a hard reality. It's obviously what we're talking about, but for me, that is something that I see as, it's not gray, it's black and white, it's fact, and that's kind of just how I see that viscerally and right off the get go, right? So
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, let's do a couple things with this, with what you guys said, right? Like one, like I mean, that's 100% true. It's just you say man does to man things that animals would never consider. So Brad right away is like, it's a fucking fact, right? It's not fiction. It's not make believe. It is a fact that men, and we say man. I don't say women, right? Not that women don't, use violence. It hasn't, but let's be honest. We're talking about men. Men have done things to other men that animals would never even consider. And I added a caveat in there because oftentimes it's men doing things to young boys and young girls, and we all know what I'm talking about, right? And if we're going to delve into the hard realities, then we have to make sure that we're using very direct language. And that's kind of one of the first things I want to do with this is oftentimes when people talk about violence, they'll use softeners, right? So they'll talk about children being abused. They won't label, they won't use hard language to talk about a grown man sexually assaulting a young child. Like they won't get, and I don't want to say descriptive, but they use language that softens it. Now this depends on the context and who you're talking to. If you're trying to explain it to children, or and there's certain circumstances where you want to use language that is maybe a little bit softer because it serves a purpose within that context. But there is also a context where we have to be very fucking direct. We have to use the language it's not sensationalistic language, right? I mean, one of the things we talk about being real, like the protect R. The R stands for ready, real, resilient, relentless, and ruthless. The real part is see it for what it is. Not worse than it is, but see it for what it is. But so many people, when they hear that, they say, see it for what it is, not worse than it is. They don't make it worse, they make it softer. But the whole idea is see it for what it is. So one of the things that we often do in the weaponizing process is when we start with people, we teach people to not be afraid of the language and to become very aware of when you're softening your language. It's okay to do that. There's times when that's appropriate. But you have to, as a base, when you're accepting the hard realities, you're beginning the weaponizing process, you have to really understand that language is very, very important, because within language, there can be a lot of denial, right? Language can help you rationalize, justify, minimize, make excuses, or flat out refuse to accept the realities of a situation. Okay, so one of the things that I'll do is let's talk about let's talk about aggression, let's talk about violence. When you talk about aggression, that conjures up an image, a symbol in people's mind. Then I say violence. Oftentimes, the symbol or the meaning, the image that people have, meaning then, of course, when you have the image in your mind, you're going to have a feeling connected to that image. When you say aggressive or aggression or aggressive people, however you want to use the word, they have a certain image and a certain feeling. Then you say violent people, and it changes a little bit. For some, it doesn't change at all. Aggression and violence are indistinguishable. People say, is hockey violent? And they see someone body check someone into the boards, or they see someone get absolutely nailed in a tackle in football, and they say, oh my God, it's so violent. Okay, that's fair enough. That's your perception. But what is aggression? What is violence? And I'm going to throw a third word out there. And the word I'm going to throw out there is an atrocity. So what I'm trying to do is give people a scope, a scale of understanding what we're talking about. If we're going to talk about violence, it's its own language. We have to start to. One of the hard realities is that we have to start recognizing and developing a vocabulary to have a conversation. Meaning that for a lot of people, what they need to understand is we're talking man does things to man that animals would never consider. You're talking about, for a lot of people, atrocities. A grown adult sexually abusing and assaulting, torturing children is an atrocity. Is it violent? Yeah, it's violent. It's like again, it's a perceptual thing because everybody has a different baseline. But if we're talking hard realities, for a lot of people, we're talking where you're devoid of choice, facing imminent grievous bodily harm or death. A lot of people would categorize what we're talking about as atrocities. A spouse, an estranged spouse showing up at his wife's, his former wife's place of employment or breaking her and murdering her. Like, that's violence. That's an atrocity. That's a catastrophe. But again, oftentimes when people are talking about this stuff, it's so uncomfortable and so off-putting to our senses that even the language with which they use to describe the realities of what happened is softened. So in the hard realities, the concept we're talking about, like Brad said, it's a fact. These are things that happen. Well, I don't know many problems that have ever been solved in the world that didn't begin with a hard conversation. Didn't begin with people seeing the problem for what it truly was and actually being able to own that problem. And part of owning the problem to me is you actually have the vocabulary, you have the language that isn't laced with denial, that isn't about softening, and it's not about sensationalizing either. It's not about extremism or exaggeration. It is just the real fucking language, to have a real conversation. That's a really hard thing for people to do. That's a hard reality. So give me, because again, you guys have seen so many people come through our program and coached people, and we've been through this ourselves. We're not different than anyone else. I had to learn the language. I had to learn how to have these hard, real conversations. But give me your reactions or your feelings or your experiences with what I'm talking about in terms of the language and all that stuff.
I think for me, the first thing that comes into my mind on how easy it is that we have set it up to not have conversations that are hard, right? It's almost like in my mind, it's kind of like a social contract. It's like everybody just agrees, like, oh, this is the subject, violence, that we're all going to agree that it's like, let's sidestep this conversation because it is a really hard, in-depth, intense conversation. So I'm okay with not having it if you're okay not having it. I think we've set it up not to. Like, we've made it very easy and almost like an agreement to not have these conversations. So when we do have these conversations like we're having now, and we do bring it up and we do use the right vocabulary and terminology, people are like, oh, okay, so we're talking about this then, are we? You know what I mean? So, and that's why I think it becomes that hard reality, because it's almost like you got to take people and you got to shake and be like, listen, like this is what's happening. This is what we're talking about right now. And, there's no sidestepping it, because it's again, it's fact. It's necessary. We have to have this conversation in order for us to move forward with confidence and certainty.
Yeah, 100%. See, and I'll let you go here, Dustin, in a sec. But what you're referring back to, Dustin, or Brad, sorry, is what we talked about a little bit last week about the blind spot in society. Yeah. The thing that hit me right away when you were talking, Brad, was polite society. Like, this is not a conversation you have in polite society. So there is an unwritten social contract and agreement that we just don't talk about these things in public. Like, good, decent, moral people do not talk about these dark atrocities, this darker side of humanity, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second. But Dustin, I wanted your just visceral thoughts on the use of language and denial and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like Brad said, there's the hard reality that people have to accept, and if you don't accept it, you're stuck in denial. Yep. And so I think if you look at that and go, well, why are people stuck in denial? Why is that almost the kind of the common denominator? Why do the masses settle for denial, and only a select niche of people like us are like, why I want to be weaponized, I want to learn to protect myself, my family, all that stuff. And it's like, well, if you look at denial, it's like, well, what are your choices? Either you acknowledge that violence is out there, violence exists, and if you acknowledge that, if you accept that reality, well, what are you going to do? You kind of only have two choices. One, learn to deal with it, or two, live in fear and panic. Yep. Like, because if you accept violence, you're like, oh yeah, the world is totally a violent place and bad things happen all the time, and I'm not going to do anything about it. Well,
Yeah.
you're probably going to exist in fear and panic all
Yeah.
the time, right?
Yeah.
Or you have to slip back into denial and just undo the fact that you tried to accept it. And I think, why don't people want to accept it? Well, there's a million reasons. The way they were raised, paradigms. I don't know if I could. I don't know where to go. I wouldn't know how to start. I mean, a ton of reasons as
Yeah.
to why they wouldn't want to choose to weaponize. But
Well, yeah, and even tied into what we just said and building off what you're saying is that, again, look at the judgment that people would face if we don't have these. If it's not socially acceptable to have these conversations, then what's the consequences of when you behave in a socially unacceptable manner? So you're the person at the get together, the social outing with some friends and family and associates and all this stuff, and somehow the conversation works its way around to violence or whatever it is. Well, if you're the one that brings it up, you're the one that has an interest in it, you're often labeled as that. You want to talk about violence? It's because you're a violent person. You want to talk about sex? It's because you're you're some sort of sexual deviant, right? It's like that's the label. Like there's always a punishment when somebody doesn't want to fully obey the social contract, even if it doesn't make sense to do so, right? So just pop up Max comment here. Violence and atrocities are 110% on the list of things people don't want to talk about. They make people uncomfortable, understandably so, but avoiding reality doesn't change anything. It's a don't look up kind of avoidance. And that's 100% correct, and it ties into exactly what we're saying. So just to keep the flow going, we're talking about the hard realities. The first thing is that you have to accept man does things to the man that animals would never consider. Now, before we move off this point, one of the things we're hitting is the whole language. To even have a conversation about violence, we have to have language that is real, okay? Acknowledge what it is. But there's one more point I want to make before we move off that really is connected to this. Man does things to man. These atrocities, these horrific acts of violence, understand that the problem that we face when you say man does things to man and men do things to boys and girls is this. It's the human fucking mind. The human mind is the ultimate concealed weapon. When I say, when we talk about atrocities, and I'm going to talk about, if we're going to get real and have a conversation, if something happened, and we have thousands of examples, unfortunately. But if something happened today or yesterday that I came on and I wanted to have a conversation with you guys about, or with our tribe about, because there's some sort of valuable lesson we have to learn, I'm going to have to describe a horrific act of violence that probably cost somebody their life. It for sure shit is emanating a ripple effect of destruction. Well, to do that, what we understand that most miss is it's not a conversation about he had the knife and the knife plunged into his body. They had a firearm and they shot him and this was the damage from it. It's talking about the evil that lurks in here. Man does things to man. What humans are capable of, this is where it originates. People have the capacity to think fucking evil. And this is one of the main points we need people to understand. You're not facing this. It's the fists, the elbows, the knife, the gun. Those are in that conversation, but it's this.
I'll interject real
Yes.
quick, because what's interesting that just hit me while you're talking about that is think about Netflix. Last time you went on Netflix, flipped through shows, looking to say, okay, what can I watch? How many shows are on there right now? Like, it'd be like the history of a serial killer or the making of a murderer. Like, there's all these different shows now about these guys who committed atrocities, serial killers, and it's like, what attracts people to that? Why would someone want to watch that? Yeah. It's not because they're like, oh, I wonder, did he use a knife? Like, I want to hear about how he stabbed them. Like, how did he do it? No, they want to hear about the mind.
Yep.
Because they just don't have a reference point for it. They're like, how did that person's mind work? Why would they do this? Do you know what I mean?
100%.
So to me, it's just like, that's exactly what you're talking about. And that's why those shows exist, because people are trying to get a grasp of how that human mind is capable of these things.
Yeah. It's what a great example, because it's so true and they're so popular right now, but they're fascinated by the psychology of violence. They're fascinated by the psychology of evil. Right. And yet they are enthralled by it because, like you said, they don't have a reference point for it. So they want to understand, why do people, motivate somebody to do this way, but they haven't had the connection yet of like, well, how do I prevent this necessarily, whatever, right? So, and that ties into what we're doing here. So that was a great point. Now, one of the things I'll do to segue us and keep us moving forward in this, because like I said, there's 4 different points that we really have to dive into, but the next side of this is that, and we talk about the human mind as the capacity to think evil, is that you may, for most people, they may have gotten this far in life without having to acknowledge that violence is a part of humanity, right? Like, so even these shows that are so popular and people are watching these things going, oh my God, look what this person did. They're recognizing that evil exists in the world and that the mind is the weapon, right? But they haven't fully acknowledged that that is part of humanity. And if you're breathing and you're of this species, you are part of humanity. And therefore, violence and this understanding and acceptance that this is within us. That's a terrifying thought to most people, right? Because they say, I am nothing like a serial killer. No, you're not like a serial killer in terms of the actions you take, but understand that this is a part of humanity. These people that commit these, and you can say, yeah, but there's all of these different factors that make them abnormal and all this stuff like that. You, at some point in your life, have to accept that violence is a part of humanity. Because
You gave a great.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you gave a great example last week when you talked about somebody grabs your head and shoves it underwater.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You don't just go, oh, okay, guess that's it. Take a big gulp in and call it quits. You're dead.
Yeah.
No, like everybody's going to fight back. And I think why that example is so easy for people to relate to is because it removes that ability to give the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
You know, if you try to sell the same point to someone, say, oh yeah, a guy puts a gun in your face and threatens you. I think people have a hard time like knowing that, oh yeah, I would totally try to save myself.
Yeah.
Because there's that chance that, well, he might not pull the trigger. I might be able to talk my way out of it. I may not have to use violence as a tool.
Yeah.
But if your head's underwater, none of that exists.
Yeah.
It's fight your way out or die.
Yeah.
Like, it's so simple. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to revisit that analogy because it's just so
perfect.
easy for people to relate to.
Yeah. I'm going to throw just a comment that Mac made up here because he's talking about the shows, and those shows always end with the bad guy being caught. So it's soothing. The ones that aren't caught don't get documentaries made about them. And that's such a great point because, again, people go, oh, yeah, that was the abnormal. That guy, they caught him. He's in jail. Like, there's nobody else in the world that is like that. There's nobody else in the world that has evil in their mind like that because that's just not part of humanity. That was some abnormality. That was something, we see them as so different from us. Yet the people that would think that, if imagine this, people have said it before, imagine if people could read your thoughts. Everybody at a time when they're mad, pissed off, or whatever, has not just had a thought like, ooh, I don't like that person. They've had some sick, dark, evil thoughts. But that is a fucking far cry away from acting on those thoughts. You know what I mean? But understanding and just recognizing that tied into the hardwired for survival. Someone's got your head underwater like you just mentioned, Dustin. You know what I mean? Like, how vicious and how hard would you fight? The mind has this capacity to think some pretty seriously dark thoughts. And yeah, you might not act on those, but also you have to recognize that in a moment where your life is in jeopardy and that resourceful thinking, no matter how dark it might be, you're in a dark moment. That darkness, that resourcefulness could allow you to defend yourself, right? So we said the tool of violence and how it is used works the same for both good and bad people, whether it's self-defense or murder is determined after. And that ties into this conversation, and it's a real hard reality for people to accept. Brad, I can see you got some thoughts about that.
Yeah, you know what? You kind of even just said what I was about to say, because I love how, we're talking hard realities right now. And, being the fact that people need to identify and accept the fact that violence is part of humanity. It is something that we all have within us. And that is a hard fucking reality for people to accept.
Yeah.
Right. And not everybody, but a lot of people, they don't think, but then if you lead them down the road, they're like, well, I could do it if this.
Yeah.
And then it's like, yeah, but that's, it's in you. And it's like, you have to be like, that's okay.
Yep.
It's our nature to understand it. But again, being suppressed and having that social contract and having that kind of not identity in society, but just how it is and how we operate with it. But it's like it's been so suppressed, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
like,
what you're doing, Brad, is you're putting a couple bookends, or you're putting a bookend on it, right? The first thing is talking about, that you have to acknowledge that violence is a part of humanity, and the point that you just brought up here, and that I'll use it as a bookend for this subject, is that for many people they've gotten to whatever point in their life without having to acknowledge that. But
right.
here's my point. Here's the bookend. You have to acknowledge that if this is the big caveat, and I want your opinion on this when I say this, you have to acknowledge that violence is part of humanity if you ever truly want to be able to protect yourself, a child, your family, right? You have to take that fact deep inside of yourself.
yeah.
And why is that? Because that's a hard reality you have to accept, because you can't protect anybody if you can't even acknowledge the conversation, if you can't acknowledge the truth, if you can't acknowledge that violence, how are you going to protect if you can't take this concept deep inside of yourself? And that's the hit, right? And that's what you just started to allude to.
If you can't acknowledge that it's external and internal.
Yes, 100%. Now, see, here's the thing. I love this statement, and it was Gavin De Becker that said this, I believe, if I remember correctly. But violence, although rarely humane, is always human. And I remember when I first read that, and I have it written in my show notes here too. But I remember reading that, and like I glossed over. I read it, and then I think 2 or 3 paragraphs past, and I stopped and I went back to that. Because although I read it, I understood it, I internalized it, I felt the feeling of I just glossed over something that I need to actually unpack more and sit with. Violence, although rarely humane, meaning what? It's fucking horrific. The reality, like that was a very clean way of talking. You're talking about atrocity. Violence is rarely humane. The things that man does to other men or boys and girls is not humane, but it is always human. We can look, and I guarantee everybody right now, if I said, think about a violent animal, a predatory animal, people see like a dog ripping someone's throat, or a lion taking down a gazelle or something like that. But it's an animal being an animal. It's something about its nature and its instincts. You know what I mean? I remember great white sharks. You know, you can go and dive with great white sharks, and they had people that could sit on the top on the viewing area, and they started issuing warnings to people because people were coming to witness great white sharks in their natural habitat. And of course, these sharks were feeding on seals. So when these sharks would hit the seals, seals were being torn apart. There was blood in the water. There was guts, all this stuff, and people were freaking out and complaining. People were like, "How could you do?" Like, you know, they were like, they were expecting some sort of, you know, National Geographic experience where I want to see a shark, but I don't want to see a shark eat a fucking seal. That's horrific. Like, what an atrocity. And it's like, that's not violence, folks. That's nature.
Yeah.
That's just the cycle of life. But we're so sheltered from life and death now, or death for sure, that we've been removed from it. You know,
like
and
you
so
don't see a shark just going around murdering seals. Like, I'm not gonna eat it. I just wanted to murder it.
I just want to murder it.
It doesn't happen. Right?
I have yet to see the documentary of, well, I've seen lots of shark documentaries, but it hasn't been the Son of Sam water edition. You know what I mean? Like,
Wasn't there a 2-headed shark attack?
yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah. And yes, yeah. And Jaws was somewhat of a serial killer. So I guess there has been representations in the movies. But as usual, Hollywood
Fiction.
gets it wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So, anyways, I like the idea of again, the hard realities. Man does things to man. You have to accept this stuff, the language, to have the real conversations. You have to take it into deep inside you that violence is a part of humanity. And why? Because to actually protect. Because if you can't see something for what it is, not worse than it is, but see it for what it really is, then anything that you prepare for any type of defense for it is going to be off its mark. It's going to miss the mark. right? You know, I can't prepare to be part of a pit crew in a Formula One race and not understand what's actually happening. You get what I mean? So if I have denial about any part of it, then my preparation is going to fail me, right? So the idea is the violence, if you can't take that deep inside of you, then you cannot actually create a safe space for yourself, your family, a child. It's not possible. Or you can only do it in a very limited way. Okay, so
Your scope changes.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
You're if you can't fully grasp the scope of violence, then your scope is going to be limited to aggression.
Yeah, 100%. What we
Right?
define as aggression, because we separate those two things.
Yeah.
Right? Aggression for us is like, oh, you know, the hockey fight. Oh, yeah, but it's aggressive, combative sports. You get in there, they can be aggressive. And, you know, they're hitting each other and trying to knock each other out and trying to submit each other. And sometimes it leads to an injury, but it's not supposed to be the intent to it. So, yeah, it's aggressive. People go, I got in a fight last night. Some guy at the bar was mouthing off, and me and him got in a fight. Well, it's aggression. And, yeah, people can die from aggression. People can be murdered from aggression. Like, it happens. It can be dangerous. But you have to separate and understand the difference, because that's, again, goes to the conversation of choice versus no choice. You know, could you remove yourself to deter? You know, did you have a choice to do something else? Right? And that's a fight implies choice. You could walk away, but you didn't want to because, you know, ego and sense of moral superiority. And you're like, fuck you, you can't talk to me that way, and now we're going to fight. Okay, anyway, so there's something else you said, Brad, on that's going to segue us to the next thing, and that some people doubt the universality of violence. We said that violence, you have to accept that it's part of humanity, and some people doubt that, but you used the example, right? And it's the same thing. Unless, you know, it's like if we do this lecture, and you'll always inevitably at the point that you talk about violence being part of humanity and that you need to accept that in order to protect, at some point somebody objects. Somebody says, there's not a chance in hell that I could be violent. I would never do it. The thought of hurting another human being is abhorrent to me. I can't do it. So they reject that violence is a part of humanity. It's not in me. But if you wait long enough, at some point, you don't have to say anything. At some point, their brain will start going and they'll go, well, unless somebody hurt my child. Now, if somebody hurt my child, then I would fucking, like, they will come to it on their own. And everybody has that in them. Like, at some point, without prompting, unless the layers of denial are so thick and so hard, they will come to that. They will find the scenario or the clause in their statement. You don't have to prompt them. They'll just find it. And when they do find it, what they recognize is that those feelings of, like, if somebody, I could never hurt somebody. If somebody was sexually assaulting my child and I walked in on that, or somebody was murdering my child, and then that violence that's part of our humanity that we're talking about, it fucking emerges like an assassin. You know, that's where the head under the water. Head goes under the water. I could never hurt somebody. He pushes your head under, and for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, they don't do shit. And then they realize he's going to kill me. And oftentimes, it's not your head being held underwater. It's when somebody grabs your kid's head and shoves it underwater. That's when they find the violent side of their humanity. That's where they come in contact with their survival instincts. And that's a problem. Because you have to have the self-worth to activate that in yourself as well, right? Sorry, Dustin, you have something.
I was just going to say, I think where some people have a hard time is because if you say, oh, do you have the capacity for violence? Their reference point for violence is negative. You know, it is the serial killer type person. They're like, well, no, I can never do that. I'm not like that. No part of me is like that. But the second, whether they come to it on their own or you give them the right scenario, where now they can relate to more like the positive role or the hero role, all of a sudden it's like, well, of course I could do that.
Yeah.
But it's because it's coming from a positive place.
Yep.
Whereas I think the visceral feeling is always to the negative. If you're not, you know, you've never studied violence and talked about it and all that, right?
Yeah. Well, they want cause and effect, right? Right away, they need something to justify their actions. Oh, I could hurt somebody. I couldn't hurt somebody. Well, I can only hurt somebody if, and I need to justify, which is a part of denial. Right? You're denying that violence is part of it. All right, I think my mic's popping, so I'm gonna have to reset it here in a second.
Just a little bit. Not
Okay,
barely.
I'm gonna finish this, then I'll say make this next statement, and then you guys can talk about it. I'll just reset my mic to get rid of the cracking. But so, anyways, like I said, that they'll create a scenario where that violence will emerge. It's in them. It's part of our nature. Nature is ruthless, right? Rather than seek to deny our nature, one of the things that we want with these conversations is for people to understand that we can accept what resources are inside of us so that they're available for us to use in these dark critical moments, even if it's one of the parts of our human nature that we wish weren't necessary, right? And that's a huge thing. It's okay to be like, have this almost duality. I hate the fact that violence is a part of humanity, but it is. There is that inside of me, even if I wish there was no need for it. I wish it wasn't, but it is. So instead of like, kind of like denying humankind's cruelties, we can accept and kind of draw on that as a resource, if that makes sense. So I just talk about that real quick. I'm just going to reset my mic.
I think that one thing that just kind of survive in our body, and it's like that is, you know, that I don't want to go down that path, but it's like we also have just the will to survive, right? I think like as societies, like we've come very, very far in history, that it's like I don't know if we would all be here if the people before us didn't have the will to survive. Now, up against whatever that happened to be, right?
Yeah, we were never the strongest apex predator on the planet.
Yeah.
So you're 100% right. If there was no defensive desire, we would have never made it as a species.
Yeah. I think the last part we'll say about this before we press on to the next point of this is that exactly what you just said. Like, it would be amazing if there was zero necessity in this world for the violent side of our nature. If we had evolved to the point where that was no longer part of our nature, it just didn't exist inside of us, wouldn't that be amazing? And good moral people want that because, you know what I mean? Let's I won't go there with that. It's a silly analogy, but I will say that, you know, it's like I want to be the change. I'm going to deny the darkness in me. I'm going to deny the violent side of my nature because that has no place in a society, right? So great, altruistic, awesome. And as a society said, we need people to evolve this way and get past it, which is where all the stuff comes from. Don't hit, a zero tolerance policy against violence in our schools and all this type of stuff. And it's great to have all these initiatives and be working this stuff. But here's the thing. It doesn't work all the time. It's not working the way you think it is. Right? We don't want to talk about violence. We don't want to talk about self-defense. We don't want to acknowledge that there's a difference between someone trying to murder and somebody trying to defend. So it's like we're not there. And one of the things is when you suppress or deny a part of your nature, you have no control over that. And this is why you have people that are under the influence of chronic stress, whatever, and then that part emerges in them. And they have no control over it. You know what I mean? And then there's all of the paradigms and it goes with it. Like now all of a sudden you have these violent feelings and you don't know how to express these things in a healthy way. And so guess what happens though? People express it in a toxic, corrosive, and septic manner that is all about fucking destruction and evil and everything else. And it's like having an army of people that are armed. You know what I mean? They have all the tools and, training and mechanisms to kill and slaughter, and you need somebody to stand guard against these. You know what I mean? But what do we arm them with? The Care Bear stare? Like love and good intentions? You know what I mean? Like, it's part of humanity. And it's like we have to accept this part of us and learn to weaponize it, learn to regulate it, learn to control it so that it is, it's there for good. If that, I don't know, does that make sense, that part of it?
Yeah, totally. It does.
And maybe that'll segue into this because the next part of this is the search for certainty, right? So we first have to talk about the hard realities, man does things to man, right? We have to talk about the languages, we have to talk about the mind as capacity to think evil. We have to accept that violence is a part of humanity. And if you can't accept that, you can't ever truly protect all of those things. And then the next thing is this: there is this search for certainty inside of us all. We want certainty. And so when we're talking about violence and the hard realities of it, we have to understand one thing. The voice that knows all about how to protect yourself may not always be the loudest, but it is the wisest, right? And so again, we're helping people to recognize that you're having a conversation about hard realities. But part of this conversation is something very beautiful and very powerful. You have inside of you, hardwired from birth, an innate survival system that has been passed down for 200,000 years of human evolution. You're born with this. And so there is a voice inside of you that actually understands about survival. It's innate. That's our head under the water, analogy. Step towards a cliff and there's something that tells you to be cautious, right? Just examples like that. But we as a society have really not learned to listen to that voice. That voice is for a lot of people unrecognizable. They don't hear it. So I like the statement of it's not always the loudest, but it is the wisest. You understand how to protect yourself, right? So I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to that point on when it comes to the search for certainty for people.
I think it's just, again, like we've been so conditioned to not listen to that voice, and also to be in an environment where we don't think that voice even needs to be there. That's not the right way I want to put it. That we've been fortunate that we don't have to, we're not fighting our way to go to work every day. Yeah. Is kind of what I'm trying to say. So it's like, it doesn't activate all that regularly, I guess it depends. But, again, we live in a society where we think that if we listen to the voice, it's fucking paranoia.
Yeah. Well, perfect. And let me throw this out there, Brad, because it's exactly what you're talking about. And here's a couple examples, right? Your kid's having something with school. Something's going on at school, right? You go and you meet with the principal, and the principal tells you everything's your concerns and your worries are baseless. It's all handled. We got it under control. Yet, based off your kid, what's happening with your kid, who no one knows better than you, their feelings, their concerns activate inside of you your feelings, but a principal tells you, don't worry about it. Your concerns are baseless. Everything's okay. Another parent tells you, don't worry about it. There's no problem here. We're okay with that. You know what I mean? You, at work, management, a supervisor, other coworkers all tell you, don't worry about it. This person's harmless. Yeah, he's a little bit weird, but he's harmless. All of these examples that I'm giving right now are squishing or causing us to ignore the voice that knows about how to protect us. Does that make sense? So it's like our hesitation, we're talking about the alarm systems that happen inside of us, right? Our intuition, our hesitation, our gut instinct, our apprehension, our persistent thought, process about this where we can't seem to let it go. All of those things, that hesitation can literally be the only thing that stands between that and a fraudulent feeling of certainty. And where is that certainty coming from? The principal. It's all baseless. Don't worry about it. Your kid's fine. We've looked at it. We're watching it. We're taking care of it. Your concerns, don't worry about it. A coworker, it's management. No, he's harmless. Don't worry about it. We've had a conversation with him. There's no, even though you feel this hesitation. So that intuition, those feelings, right? If we ignore those, we gain a sense of certainty. It's like, thank God the principal told me that it was nothing, everything was okay. Oh, my supervisor told me this person's harmless. I feel so much better now. Now I don't have to worry about taking onus for my own safety and responsibility. And then now I'm just going to flash you back for a second. The voice inside of us that understands about safety, that is connected to our survival, that is hardwired into that part of us that has what it takes to survive, may not be the loudest, but it is the wisest. And so this is a part of the hard reality conversation that you have to find the search for certainty inside yourself. Is that certainty going to come? And most oftentimes when your certainty comes from an external person, police officer says, Don't worry about it. We went and had a talk with this guy. He won't be stalking you anymore. You're safe. Right? And then, but your intuition is telling you you're in fucking trouble. This guy is coming back. I don't give a shit if the police stalked him. Maybe it's not today. Maybe it's not tomorrow. Maybe it's in a week or maybe it's in a month. This guy, I just fucking feel it. The thought of it, I can't control myself. And what you said, Brad, who are you going to listen to? Where are you getting the certainty from? When you listen to your own intuition and understand that your intuition is a highly developed barometer of human behavior. People, and I want people to hear this, and you guys can add into this if you want. Every single person is an absolute fucking expert right now on violence, on human behavior and human violence. They're an absolute expert. Human beings, the only way we exist in this world is by learning to read other human beings. The thing that blocks people from their expert knowledge is they stop listening to that internal intuitive system. They don't listen to that voice. They ignore it. Their certainty comes from outside stimulus, from outside people. They get a sense of comfort from the police. They ignore the feelings that they have. Almost every incident you could read about homicides and domestic, homicides and all this type of stuff, people at some point when they are reciting their story of violence will at some point say, unprompted say, I had a feeling. I knew. I should have recognized when this did this. I just, looking back on that, I fucking knew. I felt it. I thought this was weird. They will always say that. Why? Because our innate survival system is so evolved. 200,000 years of evolution. We are experts at studying human behavior. Does that track?
100%.
And that's what right now, the hard realities, the search for certainty is by figuring out and learning to listen to that voice inside of you.
It's I'm going to share this story because it's one that a conversation we've had before, and I'm sure that you'll be able to tie it into the conversation probably a little bit better than where I can. But I remember where we're talking about intuition, and we're talking about Jovi, right? Who's 2, and it's was like we want to allow her to trust her intuition, because if I say no, it was, go. If my brother, for instance, if she's being shy, it's like, give Uncle Ryan a hug or something like that, and she's like, she's apprehension, a little bit of kind of resistance, whatever. It's because her intuition is, not like she's in any danger, but she's just uncertainty and all that stuff. And then it's like, but allowing her to trust her intuition, not my intuition,
100%.
right? And like I know that we talked like a little bit like with the school. It's like, if you're still feeling that, just because the principal or the police officer says, oh yeah, trust me, my intuition is saying that it's all done and handled with. Yeah. It's like, but you have to listen to your intuition. Yeah. And I don't know. Like,
no, it's 100. Yeah, it's 100% true. Like we'll actually do an episode on it where we'll talk specifically about how you build and strengthen that voice of intuition. And we're going to talk about it even further here in one of our last points. But one of the things that I'll put in there right now is that understand your intuition, your survival mechanism only gives a fuck about you. Like, yes, as a parent, it can extend to your child, right? But understand your survival system cares about your survival. It's yours. Your child has their own. But of course, as a parent, you're innately hardwired to want to protect your young. So it's there. But what I'm getting at is that a police officer, a principal, a teacher, somebody, they might have the greatest intentions in the world, but they might not be feeling their innate instincts aren't activating because they're not the ones in jeopardy. They'll go home at the end of their shift. Now, sometimes the signals are so obvious that anybody that enters into the proximity of the situation feels the threat and are like, yeah, this is not good. Somebody that has had experience and they go, I've seen this play out 1,000 times and I can see where this is going. The ones that have gone bad, the indicators are there. But you will pick up on indicators that are like microscopic when you're the one that is the center of the threat. Your intuition is picking up on subtleties that even the best trained police officer with years of experience might not be able to see at that moment in time. They might see other indicators earlier than everybody else could, but you're in it. You're in your survival instincts. Your intuition is alive, alert, and working, right? That voice is there inside of you. So yeah, teaching your kids to learn to trust their intuition, right? One of the biggest things you do is people say, don't talk to strangers, is how we were all raised. That's completely false. You have to learn, you have to actually talk to strangers. We talk to strangers every single day. So do kids. You go to the mall and you ask somebody, say, oh, I'm looking for this sneaker in this size. You just talk to a stranger. You know, your kid goes up and asks the person behind the counter, I'd like blueberry bubblegum ice cream or whatever flavor. They just talk to a stranger. So the idea is absolutely absurd that you never talk to strangers. Of course, it's the boogeyman stranger. No, never talk to the guys that will hurt you. Well, if you actually teach them how to talk to strangers and trust their intuition, they'll be able to differentiate and intuitively feel who they can trust and who they can't. So that concept of teaching your kids to trust their intuition, not just yours, so you're not teaching them to trust externally always, is a very, very, very important point. So one of the things we just said before we push off in the search for certainty is that there is a universal code of violence, and every single human being already understands this code. That's what I meant when I said everyone's an expert at violence. Universal code of violence. Everybody already understands it, but most people don't know how to listen to that expert inside of them, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about is deniers and acceptors. Okay, so within the conversation that we're having, especially at this point, it's fitting, right? There's going to be people that are going to deny. Actually, I want to throw up Mac's comment because it's a really, really good comment. It ties in just before we move off. But that voice inside of us that we have to learn to listen to has been co-opted by Hollywood. We think it means something else now, and that's 100% accurate. Again, Hollywood and society and so many different things and aspects of our society has conditioned us to, like Brad said, to ignore that voice. It's like you're crazy, you're being paranoid. If you're listening to those inner concerns and worries, you're not a true fucking man because men don't feel fear, no fucking fear. You know what I mean? Like it's all that bullshit that, again, teaches us to believe that our safety is not our responsibility, right? And that's a great point, Mac. And that's actually going to come up in what we're going to talk about right now. So I wrote this down. I'm going to make a statement here that I want to talk about. For every cruelty to a man, woman, or child, there is an audience of deniers that stays seated, sees the signals, and quickly closes their eyes. We're talking about now deniers and acceptors, and we have to really hear this. For every cruelty to a man, woman, or child, so for everything that man does to other men, or boys or girls, there is an audience of deniers that stays seated, sees the signals, and quickly closes their eyes. Kids that are being groomed, kids that are being molested, kids whatever, there's a neighbor, there's a coach, there's a teacher, there's a parent, there's an uncle, there's a cousin. Somebody has had a bad feeling about something connected to that situation. There's stories of boyfriend, girlfriend, they separate, the boyfriend starts stalking, and the mother, the parent, the aunt, the uncle, the cousin, the friend, the roommate has a terrifying feeling that this person's gonna hurt this individual. And 3 weeks, a month, 2 months goes by, whatever, and it happens. But they say nothing, they stay seated. Or maybe they weakly voice that concern and they do it through dark humor. Boy, that's kind of, that if that guy's doing that, oh, Jesus, that's the kind of guy that shows up with a knife one day. And everyone's, oh yeah, he's crazy, but I think he'd be okay. I went to the police and the police said just to change my phone number, but I'd be okay. You know what I mean? Like somebody's watching this. And again, this is a very hard conversation to have because who are you in this narrative? Are you the denier or are you the acceptor? Are you the person that has seen something going on at work, or you've seen something just out in your life, or something closer in your inner circles, whatever, and you have been like, I'd rather avoid the awkwardness of this conversation. I don't want to say something. I don't have any proof. I don't have any evidence. All I have is a fucking feeling. And again, that ties into one of the things we're going to talk about real quick here. Why are we so quick to dismiss our feelings? Now, I understand in a court of law, you have to have evidence. You can't, whatever. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about survival instincts. We're talking about deniers and acceptors of things that are happening, right? I'll throw this in here right now for the intuition. When you have a feeling, an intuitive feeling, understand two things. One, the intuition, although may not always be correct, it is always about something, and it always has your best interest at heart. When that intuitive feeling, those alarm levels go off, it is something's happening. It may not always turn out to be what your fear was about, but something is there, and it always has your best interest at heart. It's trying to keep you safe. That's what it is.
My favorite analogy that you often use, Greg, is, if there's smoke, there's fire. If you wake up in the middle of the night and your bedroom is full of smoke, you don't just open the window and go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing, except when it comes to violence,
Yeah.
people are completely happy to just open that window and climb back in bed.
Yeah, 100%.
They don't want to look and see if there's fire. You know what I mean? They don't want to investigate it any further.
Yeah.
But it's like, if there's smoke, there's fire.
Yep.
So if you see a signal, it means something.
Yep.
You can't ignore it. You have to trust that voice, right?
Yep. 100%. And I don't think there's a ton to add to the deniers and acceptors on the point that we've just made, from the standpoint that there's always an audience. And that's sobering, because if I'm around and I'm part of that audience, I don't want to stay seated and close my eyes. I want to be the type of human being. I want to have the strength of character and conviction to stand up and say something, even if I'm wrong, because it's about something set it off, and it has my best interest or the interest of my children or whatever at heart. And I accept that. I believe in that. Again, I understand the wisdom within that voice, and I need to listen to that. Right? So, again, I'm going to quote Gavin DeBecker here, but he offered up a statement that says the solution to violence is not more. It's not more laws, it's not more gun laws, it's not more restrictions and bans on knives and things like that. It's not more laws. It's not even more police or more prisons. The solution is the acceptance of reality. And that's why this conversation is so powerful. The acceptance of reality. When people can accept the realities, accept that their intuition might be going off and something's happening, and need to stand up. They need to not be a denier. They need to be an acceptor. They accept that violence is part of humanity. They accept that man does to man things that animals would never consider. They have to, all of this. If you can accept what we're talking about, then you are accepting and you are becoming a part of the solution to violence in this world. That is how it is. If people can just start accepting it, then the actions will start countering it. And that's because that's the high ground. From reality, you step on the high ground and you can actually see what's truly going on. See it for what it is, not worse than it is. And then you can actually do something about it. So now you're part of that solution. So I just think that's an important part of this conversation. And again, where do you fall in this conversation? Are you the acceptor or are you the denier? I'm going to pop Max comment. I think a lot of the time people don't want the responsibility of speaking up. 20 people sitting awkwardly on the subway while someone is being aggressive towards someone else, 100%. And again, that's again the denier. Rationalize, justify, minimize, make excuses, or flat out deny. Rationalize why, well, I'm 50 years old and there's younger kids. There was younger people there. They should have done something. I had a sore hand. So I've rationalized why I couldn't get involved in this or why I didn't say anything. I justify it. Say, well, I would have, but there was somebody blocking me in front of me, so I couldn't get to them in time. You know what I mean? That's the deniers inside of us. That's you staying seated and closing your eyes. Right? So your acceptance of reality in and of itself is the greatest asset that you're going to bring to any type of prediction about violence. Like when you accept the realities, that strengthens that voice, right? That wise voice that understands how to survive. That's what does it, is you accepting that reality. Okay, and then I'll say this too because I think it's a powerful quote, but violence isn't about looking for the obvious, it's about looking at the obvious. So violence isn't about looking for the obvious. Like, what am I? I'm looking for things. I'm looking for this indicator or looking for that indicator. Violence is about looking at the obvious. It's there. People, isn't that interesting, right? People spend all their time looking for something instead of looking at what is. And that's the realities. And that's where this big shift occurs in this conversation, is you just start to see it for what it is, not worse than it is. Right? Okay, I'm just going to pop Mac up. I like the airplane analogy. If someone tries to take over the plane, now everyone will jump on them before they get 2 steps towards the cockpit. 100%. We had a one trial learning, right? 9/11. Anybody on an airplane now, anything happens and you got 250 passengers, instead of sitting there in denial, rationalizing, justifying all that stuff, you got people fucking dive bombing people, man. That guy doesn't get 2 feet and people got him duct taped and hit him over the head with wine bottles. You know what I mean? It's like it happens fast because the blueprint's been shifted. So people don't go into denial about what could happen if somebody, hijacks a plane. So that's a great analogy and great point, Mac. Okay. Let's talk about the last thing here, because this is such an important point, and we're running long on time here, but it's very, very important that we talk about it. This little voice, this intuition, is labeled the wild brain, right? And the biggest point I want to make on this is that we have the logical brain and we have the wild brain. The logical brain is rational thinking. It is what everybody else typically does externally. It's when the principal says your concerns are baseless, don't worry about it. It's the coworkers and management saying he's harmless, again, don't worry about it. It feeds the logical brain of like, well, logically speaking, what evidence do I have in this? And I rationalize and I problem solve. The logical brain is fucking slow and plodding, and it's methodical, and it does all this other shit. It is powerful in so many areas of our life, but it is absolutely it's virtually useless when it comes to our survival. The wild brain is that intuitive survival instinct, right? It's fucking primal. It's hardwired from birth, and that is what we need to learn to lean into. But society has put the logical brain on the pedestal. We revere logical thinking. We revere academic mindset, right? It's so fucking rewarded. And yet the wild brain, so the logical brain has become the master and the wild brain has become the servant. But the only reason we're here as a species is because the wild brain, our survival, our primal instincts have allowed us to perpetuate as a species. So the dichotomy is reversed. Before, the wild brain was how you survived. The logical brain is what gave you an advantage, right? You had the wild brain, but then you could rationalize and think and problem solve and be resourceful, but the wild brain led it. And then that's changed. And now for many, many people, they've never experienced or had a conversation with their wild brain. Never mind allow the wild brain to lead them, especially in times of crisis. Okay, so I just want you guys' opinions on the wild brain versus the logical brain.
Yeah, it's like Brad talked about earlier when he when he was talking about intuition, and he said, well, part of it is because of the society that we live in. Our society is we're not having to fight our way to work every day. We don't have to fight for food. We don't have to fight for shelter. So we don't have to rely on our intuition as much. Same thing goes for the wild brain. We live in a pretty comfortable society. Yeah. So we're able to rely so heavily on the logical brain, and we're able to ignore our wild brain more and get away with it. Yeah. Doesn't mean it's right, but you can get away with it a lot of the time. Yeah. And that's a super dangerous thing when it comes to trying to protect yourself. Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say is if you look at a wild animal, it's like, what do they operate on? What keeps them alive? Instinct, just pure instinct. Mm-hmm. And instinct lives in the wild brain, and it's the exact same for us. All our survival mechanisms that you alluded to, all these hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, it's all pre-packaged instincts in your wild brain. And so you have to be connected to it and willing to listen to it and to use it.
Brad, you want to throw anything on that?
Yeah, one thing I just want to add to that is that many times you have conversations with people about violence, and they drum up some sort of solution to what they think that they would apply should that time occur. And it's very easy for people to, in the comfort of their home, having a glass of wine, come up with a solution to violence in their intellectual, logical brain when that's not the one that's going to be there. So it's like, it's the wild brain's the one that's going to be there. And it's like, well, like everybody has a plan until they get hit with the truth. That's no different than with violence but like, you cannot think your way through this. You can't sit here like in a comfortable, warm, cozy house and be like, oh yeah, if this happened, I would do this, because you're not in the right brain. You're in your intellectual mind, and it's not going to serve you when it comes to violence. And it's like, that's a very dangerous thing, because people think that that'll actually, oh, okay, well, if I think I would do this, 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 and this, and it's like, yeah, but you're not under threat.
Yeah.
You're not having the emotional and the physiological responses to that threat. So it's like, you can't think that what you're fucking plan in your head is going to work, because it's not, because it came from your intellectual mind. It didn't come from your innate survival wild brain.
Yeah, and with that, you're talking about now the wild brain activating the physiology and the sympathetic nervous system and all the things that come with it. And people need to understand that part of what happens and occurs inside of the weaponizing process is to learn how to strengthen. We talked last week, violence is a language. You got to learn how to start speaking that language. Today, we're talking about the hard realities. And at the end of this, we're talking about learning to strengthen the connection you have with your wild brain. Learning to, yes, you're going to have this logical brain, and it's going to serve you in our society. It's revered, right? But the wild brain cannot be the servant. The wild brain cannot be the servant. The wild brain has to be put, I believe it has to be honed and developed and be appreciated and understood for what it is. It is the true master of our survival. And so it has to be developed like that. That's what the weaponizing process does. It builds that connection. And it's primal. And a lot of people, they're craving that in this world. I mean, for a lot of people right now, depressed, everything, the world is fucking burning for a lot of people. Things are changing and people go into these defensive mindset, but the wild brain is what sees us through dark times. But you need to refine it and connect with it. And that's what the weaponizing process does. That's how we're talking about, like, weaponizing your mind and your body. It doesn't just prepare you for facing violent encounters, but it transforms the type of person you are. And it makes you more authentically yourself and more intuitive. And it's just such a powerful, powerful part of us as a human species. And that's what we want people to understand, the full perspective of what you get when you strengthen and reconnect with the wild brain, that part of yourself, the primal part of yourself. And so I'm going to read this, and then I think we'll probably wrap up for this, but I wrote this down because I wanted to read this entire quote for people to have it's like a definition of the wild brain. But very important points. The wild brain obeys nothing, conforms to nothing, answers to nobody, and will do whatever it takes. The wild brain is unfettered by emotions, by politics, politeness, and as illogical as the wild brain may seem sometimes, the wild brain in the natural order of things is completely logical. It just doesn't care to convince us of anything by using logic. In fact, it doesn't give a damn what we think. This is so important that people just understand the connection with the wild brain, that part of your survival, that's why I was saying about it's your survival. It only cares about you continuing to exist. It does not conform to shit. It does not have mental bias like the fucking logical brain does, right? We form a bias. The wild brain does not form a bias. It does not conform to shit. It answers to nobody, and it will fucking do whatever it takes, right? It's unfettered by emotions. Doesn't matter what you're feeling. I don't know if I feel this. The wild brain is fucking crystal clear. Emotions does not affect it. It's not affected by politics or politeness, right? And as illogical as it may seem at times, in the natural order of things, when it comes to the survival, that part of our nature, natural order of things, it's fucking completely logical because it's about something. It sensed something and it wants us to survive, so it's taking action. It doesn't give a fuck about anything else. It just doesn't give a shit to convince us. It sends the signals, it sends the feelings, it mobilizes the resources in the body, and it doesn't give a fuck what you think, right? It doesn't care and it doesn't try to convince us. It just is. So what we need to do is we need to learn to listen to that. to trust in it, because that's what we've lost, right? The false sense of certainty. People's certainty comes from somebody else. That's where most people get their certainty from. We have police, I'm safe. We have a government, military, I'm safe. We have we have painted lines on the highway, I'm safe. Our certainty comes from so many external things, so much so that people don't care to fucking take ownership or responsibility. They don't think they need to. Yet documentaries and news reports and everything of what human nature truly is. It's in us. There's violent people among us. Mac made a point earlier about how everybody thinks, the serial killer ends by getting caught. All the bad guys are locked up. Why would a bad guy be out on the streets? And if he is, that's only short term. He'll get locked up, never to be released again. I know somewhere Mac's dying laughing because that's the fucking so far from the truth. It would scare people if they really understood how the system is turning out people that should not be on the street. But, there's predators among us, folks. That's a hard reality. Accept it. So that's the idea of the wild brain. Okay. Do you guys have anything to add on to that?
Not to the wild brain.
Okay. Let's wrap it up then. We gave you a framework. We went a little longer than we normally go, but that's okay. But we started off we need to have the hard realities. We got to have the hard conversations. We can't be in denial. We have to develop the language of it. So we have the hard realities, the search for certainty, the deniers and acceptors, and ultimately talking about the wild brain. It's a big, deep subject. To tackle all four of those in one episode is huge. But I hope that everybody got something out of this conversation. I hope that you recognize that this is just the beginning of this conversation. These topics need a lot of discussing. And the more that you discuss these, the more that you engage in the hard realities and the hard conversations, the more that you'll be able to clearly define the line between deniers and acceptors and make a decision as to what side of that fence you want to be on. Because there is no riding the fence. Riding the fence is the deniers. You have to make a choice to move into action on this and become an acceptor.
I'll just share one thing, kind of more from our physical training that we do. And it's the expression of do something because it is something.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what we talked about tonight fits in with that. Whether it's your intuition, your wild brain, all of it. It's like violence. It's like if there's signs, do something because it is something.
Yeah, 100%. Again, right away, that analogy is being an acceptor. Don't be a denier, right? So, Brad, any final thoughts?
Oh, I love the conversation tonight. I don't think I have anything to add.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a great one.
Yeah, without going deeper, it was really, really good. And again, this is something that we could have just a massive roundtable on, obviously, right? Because like I said, each of these points alone could have been a full session. And so in the future episodes, we will dive deeper into specific aspects of this. But for tonight, I just hope that everybody got something out of it. We want to be the acceptors. We want to be the weaponized. We want to learn to rise regardless, become our own protectors. That is what this is about. Thank you so much for joining us here on the newly titled Education of a Weaponized Man, Mastering the Tool of Violence, where we talk strategy, tactics, and tools. We do a deep dive into it. Every Thursday night at 7:30 p.m., we are here live on Facebook. But if you're listening to this, this is a new podcast we're launching. Will be available on iTunes and everywhere else that you can find your favorite podcasts. So whatever point you're hearing this, please do not forget to subscribe, set your alerts, don't miss a single episode. We will be dropping these weekly, as well as I'll be dropping some extra insights and a few other things. So lots of stuff going on, lots of activity. Please follow, share this with anybody else that you think can benefit from these conversations. Comment, contribute. We love it and appreciate every single person. This is a passion for us to help weaponize the world and help people rise regardless in their own lives, in their own ways. So that is it. So again, for Coach Brad, Dustin, thank you guys so much for your time, your expertise, your input. It's deeply appreciated. And anybody wants to follow us, you can check us out at Awaken the Protect R. So protect with an R at the end. awakentheprotectr.ca. Check out our free line programs. We have a ton of free stuff up there. You can just go deep on the content. And we got a couple exciting things that'll be coming up next week. A new book that I've written, and a small ebook, and free workshop and a lot of things, and I'll be dropping more on that next week. So that's it, everybody. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay weaponized, and we will chat again soon.